Over the past few weeks, the Communist Party USA has launched an all-out assault on figures within the patriotic socialist movement, namely Haas from Infrared, Peter Coffin, Jackson Hinkle, but particularly Caleb Maupin. I cannot speak on behalf of the other names mentioned, as I do not personally know them, although I have some criticisms of them. However, I can speak on behalf of Caleb, as I do personally know him, and contribute, when called upon, towards the Center for Political Innovation. The attacks on Caleb, that he is a white supremacist, a Nazi, a grifter, transphobic, and racist person are completely out of line and exists as an orchestrated attempt on behalf of the leadership of the CPUSA, tied to Joe Sims and his lackeys, to assassinate Caleb's character. Caleb is not a bad person. Far from such. He's a good person. Perhaps a little too clean-cut and by the books for my tastes. As someone who knew Caleb for 10 years, I can say that he has remained firm to his convictions and his principles. He is opposed to NATO interventions within the Middle East and within third world nations. He supports independence movements of U.S. satellite states under the boot of private capital's dictatorship. He has risked his life traveling with an Iranian convoy to provide food and aid to Yemen. He has forged alliances with anti-imperialists and comrades within China, Iran, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Libya, and all over the world. The man has done literally everything anyone could do to defy the U.S. State Department and Wall Street as it is relative to resisting the imperialist hegemony of neoliberalism, and by himself has done far more than the idiots who surround Joe Sims and put lies into his ears have ever done. Actions speak much louder than platitudes, and while Caleb is a man of many words, he is also a man of actions to back those words up. I consider Caleb a comrade from the Occupy Wall Street days, and I consider him a friend, and I will not stand for lies and attacks levied towards friends of mine. In another universe or in another paradigm that not spoiled by the agents of capitalism and opportunism, Caleb Maupin, in all likelihood, would be in charge of the CPUSA, in all likelihood, and he would develop a party line that is relative to a communal synthesis that could be applicable to for everyone, and primarily to address the crisis that is neoliberalism. And I'm going to talk about neoliberalism a lot here. With these things stated, and to make this absolutely clear, I do not work for Caleb Maupin. And I will say that again. I do not work for Caleb Maupin. To the dismay of some of his most staunch supporters, I am unrepentantly not a fan of organized religion. I feel organized religion is too integrated with global capitalism to be reformed or won over to communism. But disagreements aside, whereas Caleb and his inner circle are not opposed to working with the church. I am more so influenced by James Connolly, industrial unionism, and I advocate for passive subversion relative to the establishment. However, when material conditions and social conditions are irreconcilable, then I do not frown upon non-passive and extra-legal subversion relative to the bourgeois establishment. Caleb is influenced by William Z. Foster, is more by the books with building a mass line and a mass program, and advocates for the peaceful transition from capitalism into socialism. While we both believe in centralization, my tendency is more so towards moderate liberalism, and with an emphasis on a post-U.S. paradigm, whereas Caleb's tendency is more toward social conservatism, with an emphasis on preserving the positive aspects of the anti-imperialist, anti-racist resistance culture within the United States. We have differences of opinion, but despite those differences, I am not going to slander Caleb, a friend of mine, and call him a Nazi, especially when actual free market and neo-fascist sympathizers like Styx, Hex, and Hammer and Augustus Sol Invictus hate Caleb and everything he stands for. The fact that the leaders of the CPUSA, the leadership within the Communist Party USA, affiliated with Joe Sims and his idiotic lackeys, they're calling Caleb Maupin a white supremacist when literal far-right types who possess neo-fascist tendencies utterly reject Caleb is absolutely asinine and reveals just how out of touch the supposed vanguard of the American left, that being Joe Sims and his CPUSA lackeys, really are in terms of knowing how the neo-fascist right actually thinks, in terms of accurately gauging where the aggregate of the population as a whole is, and in terms of what the anti-globalization left is thinking. However, when necessary and appropriate, despite our theoretical disagreements, I will work with Caleb. I don't work for him. I work with Caleb relative to developing synthesis as it applies to mitigating the damages of what Caleb terms as synthetic leftism. And it is more than evident today. The mainstream left within the United States is broken. Let me say that again. Broken. The American left at present is in a self-destructive and nihilistic downward spiral relative to inverted puritanical witch hunts that have more to do with challenging the superstructure instead of challenging the structure of capitalism. During the time of tremendous economic struggle and social upheaval that affects everyone, what is the mainstream American left concerned with? They are marching in lockstep with the pro-globalization Democratic Party, shaming people for not taking vaccines, even when they are, indigenous health practitioners, maybe, or maybe even when they just don't feel like it's necessary. They march in lockstep with the pro-globalization Democratic Party on getting Middle America to redefine gender when Middle America barely understands cis gay culture. They march in lockstep with the pro-globalization Democratic Party to socially ostracize anti-globalization Trump supporters, that wing of the Republican Party, and call them fascists and white supremacists, instead of, encouraging the Trump wing to wage an all-out war on the Bush-Cheney wing of the GOP, which is also kind of friendly with the DNC, the pro-globalization DNC, mind you, primarily responsible for the problems we have today. They march in lockstep with the pro-globalization Democrats in reacting to Kyle Rittenhouse, who deserves to be condemned, but, instead of just looking beyond the case in of itself, they really should be attacking the big real estate interests that prompt police departments across the country to continue harassing and murdering BIPOC communities as a means to drive them out to facilitate mass gentrification and replace them with BLM sign-waving liberals who drink Starbucks. They march in lockstep with the Democratic Party, the pro-globalization Democratic Party, with a hyper-focus on restructuring outdated cultural institutions via modern-day hyper-intersectional culture war, instead of marching in lockstep with the people, regardless of their ethnicities or backgrounds, who are losing their jobs, losing their homes, and losing their hope in the midst of this turbulent time. They march in lockstep with the pro-globalization Democratic Party in attacking Jimmy Dore. Listen, I don't really care about Jimmy Dore. He makes some good points. I don't think he's a revolutionary, but he'd probably rather have an FDR resurrection instead of a socialist upheaval. But I digress. They spend all their time attacking Jimmy Dore and Caleb Maupin, of all people, instead of putting their collective efforts into condemning the bourgeois and the economic elite who draw up stratagems via the World Trade Organization and the World Economic Forum with the intent to squeeze all the worth out of the lower levels of capital and the global proletariat and grind us all into serfdom. When I was in my early 20s, when things still made sense, the enemy of the left was globalization. The left was opposed to the World Trade Organization. The IMF distrusted the United Nations, condemned free trade, condemned deindustrialization, condemned the military-industrial complex, and the 1% was public enemy number one. That was the left that I came up with. That was the left that Caleb came up with. In 2012, I marched in the streets of Chicago protesting the NATO conference alongside of people who in their 40s were protesting the World Trade Organization in Seattle in late November 1999. The left that Caleb and myself came up with scared the living piss out of the neoliberal establishment and didn't shill for the neoliberal establishment or the Democratic Party. But fast forward a decade later, the CPUSA takes orders from the DSA, which takes orders from the Justice Democrats, which takes orders from nonprofit organizations, academia, and the Democratic National Committee, who take orders from the CIA, who take orders from the American 1%, who take their orders from the World Trade Organization, the Bank of International Settlements, and the World Economic Forum. And the order that is given by the very people at the top is that the American left works against the interests of proletarian organization around economic deterioration to protect the interests of the bourgeois during this late stage of neoliberalism while they make plans to transition into a new system, a new paradigm. An environmentally Malthusian high-tech dystopia intersected with a unitary global feudalist state erasing the lower levels of capital and where all the modes and means of production are owned exclusively by multinational corporations associated with American oligarchs and European aristocracy. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the direction that the 1% wants to head into. They have made their intentions very clear and out in the open, and they have introduced preliminary measures under the facade of a global health crisis, which has allowed them to weaponize mainstream media, blending facts with propaganda, control and monitor people's everyday interactions, shut down the whole entire economy, and shut down just everything that relates to Main Street, polarize the public, and not just the United States, but many different countries to the brink of civil war, and extract $5 trillion as hundreds of millions of people all around the world have lost everything, and in some cases, their own lives. Who needs a world war to reduce the population of the earth when a plague of very questionable origins kills millions of people who are elderly and sick? Who needs a world war to reduce the population of the earth when social, economic, and material conditions become so unbearable that people would willingly kill themselves to spare themselves of the misery? Who is going to stop the paradigm of neo-feudalism from coming in when these utterly stupefied, yeah, they're college educated, but they are stupefied, professional class liberals openly embrace this paradigm shift when the left, which used to fight the World Trade Organization, which used to fight the World Economic Forum, and which used to fight globalization, joins in with the bought-off liberal class traders in condemning those who resist this paradigm shift as conspiracy theorists or colonial settlers or white supremacists. Get real, folks. Get real. Seriously. While the American left has always stood against white supremacy and stood against patriarchy and stood up for LGBTQ rights and stood up for the marginalized and the oppressed, that is true. The left did not lose sight of the bigger picture involving the 1%, attempting to undermine people's sovereignty for the sake of their own economic interests that have no loyalty to any country other than Switzerland, where they put all their money, their blood money, and hide it. You know, blood money that's also unpaid taxes. If these financially and socially designed encroachments that were introduced in 2020, March of 2020, occurred in 1999, what would have happened? The American left would not be fretting over red-brown alliances. They wouldn't be listening to some loser named Vosh. They wouldn't be obsessing why people don't get Jay Sakai and Robin DiAngelo's theories relative to anti-racism and colonial settlerism. They wouldn't be so self-absorbed not to work with others because of their sexual nonconformity. No, none of that would have been happening. Nope. They would have been smart enough to see through the 1% mainstream media propaganda and distortion. Case in point, the left did not allow themselves to get distracted by the Clinton-Lewinsky debate and debate sexual etiquette with the conservatives. No. They organized for a battle in Seattle to fight the World Trade Organization. They would have been smart enough to see the 1% using academia to justify science as a means to deprive people of their livelihoods. They would have been perceptive enough to see the economic devastation, suffering, and despair wrought on all working peoples as a result of deliberate economic warfare designed as a global health emergency. They would have organized and amassed a broad tent coalition because there is no ideological purity when it comes to class war. They would have marched like they did with their broad tent coalition against the World Trade Organization in Seattle. But they would have also marched in every big city from Los Angeles to New York, and they would have brought hellfire, brimstone, fury of nonpartisan, anti-globalization, proletarian outrage to every single city, and would have pushed back to such an extent where the professional class liberals would have been so frightened to the point where they would have begged for their elected officials to tell the big pharmaceutical lobbyists to back the hell off. Please, please. And they would have been begging on their knees, crying for the global health crisis and the new normal to end tomorrow. That's what they would have done. The mainstream American left is broken right now. It has lost sight of the bigger picture. The Democratic Party, the nonprofit organizations, academia, the United Nations, Silicon Valley, the Justice Democrats, the Club of Rome, the progressives, the liberals, no matter how many BLM signs, rainbow flags, trans tricolor flags they wave, no matter how many crocodile tears they cry for the indigenous, for the climate, for racial justice, they are not our friends. No matter how much they say that they are, because they will literally do whatever it takes to address every problem except for the main problem that relates to our collective deteriorating material conditions brought on by neoliberalism and globalization efforts that undermine the popular sovereignty of every nation on earth. including the United States, to benefit the economic interests of the 1%. While I do not agree with all of his methods, nor do I agree with all the people he aligns himself with, Caleb Maupin is at least trying to fix this problem as peacefully as he can, and the leadership of CPUSA is attacking Caleb for wanting to put an end to the crisis of neoliberalism and prevent neo-feudalism from occurring. Why is that? Because the corrupt, bought-off leadership of the CPUSA, tied to Joe Sims and his lackeys, benefits from neoliberalism and doesn't want the funding they get from the pro-globalization DNC in exchange for sheepdogging young people to vote blue no matter who to dry up. I have never joined the CPUSA for this reason. And while Caleb still encourages people to join them, I believe otherwise. I feel that if people want to form a political party, if that's the route they want to go, they should not join the long-compromised CPUSA, and instead resurrect Vito Marcantonio's American Labor Party, built on a platform of rejecting globalization, imperialism, systemic racism, and protecting the people who live in the United States from wage slavery and economic marginalization. In conclusion, the mainstream American left needs to wake up and smell the rotting and decaying roses. You are being the useful idiots of the pro-globalization Democratic Party and the useful idiots of all of their class traitor lackeys in academia and the nonprofit organizations. Intersectionality, climate initiatives, and social justice are being weaponized by capitalism to attack people, and not just Trump supporters, but all people who don't want their lives to be run by the World Trade Organization, the World Economic Forum, the Bank of International Settlements, the United Nations, or the World Health Organization. Sovereignty rests with the people. It does not rest in a 1% bank account in Switzerland or Grand Cayman. You don't have to agree with Caleb or patriotic socialism or Marxist-Leninism even, but at least get a grip of yourselves and divorce yourselves from the class traitor liberals who do nothing to stop us from being subjugated by Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and the 1% in the name of a greater good that is good for no one except for the bourgeois. Put down the weed, stop questioning your sexuality, stop inventing excuses not to work with others because they aren't as intersectional as you are. Stop allowing yourselves to be led astray by the apologists of neoliberalism. Get up off your ass and start organizing like there is no tomorrow, because there isn't a tomorrow. We are in a fight of our lives right now against the bourgeois that wants all of us dead. Less culture war, more battle in Seattle. Divorce yourselves from the Democratic Party. Pay no mind to the counter-revolutionary, bought-off, corrupt leadership of Joe Sims and his stupid lackeys within the CPUSA. Take up the people's hammer and smash this rotten paradigm of new normalism and neoliberalism into a million non-repairable pieces, and let the 1% know that you will not be misled, bullied, or intimidated by them any longer. Get a hold of yourselves, leftists. This is not an ideological purity struggle. This is not a popularity contest. This is a class war. You want to win at all costs. You have to win at all costs. And you know what? Caleb Maupin wants to win, and so do I. This is Comrade Pella, signing out.